This is my office, and there's a few pictures of interest here that I want to show you. First of all, this is Ben-Gurion, David Ben-Gurion, Israel's first Prime Minister, when he worked at the winery. He started here before he went into politics, and he caused a few problems. He was responsible for the first strike in Israel, which happened at Carmel Winery at Rishon. I think it was 1906, 1907. He started a competition amongst the other workers who could stand on the grapes for longest time. For 3 straight days he stood on the grapes, stamping on the grapes, and he won his bet. He beat everyone else. But the smell of wine during fermentation made him feel so ill that he couldn't taste wine for years after. So that's Ben-Gurion. When he came back here in the early 70s, just a few years before his death, this is him meeting the manager, Mr. Oshczynski, and he had some very good things to say about the winery. The Carmel Winery is unique in that we have had 3 prime ministers of Israel who have worked at Carmel. David Ben-Gurion was the first. The second, the clue is in the name, Levi Eshkol. Eshkol is a grape cluster. He managed the vineyards surrounding Rishon LeZion. In those days, the winery was a proper French chateau. There was the chateau, and surrounding were vineyards. And the third Prime Minister of Israel who worked at Carmel was Ehud Olmert, who was born in Binyamina, but he didn't work at Zichron, he worked here. Rishon LeZion, I don't know another company in the world that has 3 Prime Ministers working for them. This is the shares. The first time Carmel was launched wasn't in Israel. In fact, it was in export markets. Carmel was a name used for marketing the wines of Rishon LeZion and Zichron Yaakov abroad. And the first time Carmel appeared was in Warsaw in 1896. And these are the shares that they sold for the Carmel Wine Company in Warsaw, which was the first Carmel Wine Company to exist. Now this is a lovely picture and very interesting. Firstly, it is a real branch of Carmel Winery in Rehov Ben Yehuda in Jerusalem. This building is now a bank discount. And what's interesting here, here the word Rishon LeZion is written like the French write it, with a CH instead of an SH, because the administrators of the winery in those days were French. And you can see here the logo of Rishon LeZion is bigger than that of Carmel. This is the famous Palwin wine. This wine was sold in England, was the #1 kosher wine sold in England. Didn't do any good for Carmel's image because it was a Kiddush wine, a sacramental wine. Historically, it's a very important brand because Pal wine is short for Palestine wine. And when they opened the Carmel branch in England, it was known as the Palestine Wine Company in 1898. And the main brand they sold was Palwin, Palestine wine. And each wine had a number. Why? Because the new immigrants who were coming in from Russia and Eastern Europe didn't speak English, but they needed to order the wine. So each wine had a number, and they used to go in and say, I want number 10 or number 4A, until today. Now this is an advertisement, a handful of Palestine, Palwin, Palestine wines from the Palestine Wine and Trading Company. It's a little bit of history. And the date, April the 10th, 1925. This is another famous old label, and you can see the name Palwin in here. You can see Rishon LeZion, this time written with an S, and again the number. This is one of the first selected wines. You can see selected was then over 40 years old, and it's now Israel's biggest selling brand. This is the selected of today. Okay? However, in those days, selected was just a description on the label. You can see this the early 70s, and it's one of the earliest varietal wines in Israel as well, where the wine is named after the dominant grape variety. I was born in 1957. This wine is from 1958. And you can see Carmel's present sparkling wine. So this is a wine that's nearly 60 years old. This was a wine that was the first quality wine aged in small oak barrels. Until then, wines weren't aged in oak, or they were aged in big oak barrels, not small oak barrels. So this wine is aged in small oak barrels, and the winemaker, Freddie Stiller, didn't have any barrels for wine. But in those days, he had a lot of Limousin oak barrels for brandy. So without telling the manager of the winery, he used some of the barrels he had for brandy to age the wine. And this wine lasted for 20 years. It was a miracle wine, and it was really the first quality wine in Israel. This is the important poster which records the fact when Carmel, the historic winery, joined the world of quality wines by winning one of the most important prizes, or arguably the most important prizes ever awarded to an Israeli winery. You can see what it says. Only a winery of 120 years history can make history. And this was the Kerem Kayoumi Shiraz of 2006, which won the Decanter World Wine Award 2010, which is the Oscars of the World Wine Awards, and no Israeli winery until today has succeeded to win this prize. So it was a tremendous honor for Israel and of course for Carmel.